So you want to hear the dirt? You want to hear about the big fight between the Apostle Paul and the Apostle Peter? Here it is. So the Apostle Paul, he's in Antioch, being associate pastor to Barnabas at the church at Antioch. And so the Apostle Peter comes over for a little visit. So we know Paul. Paul's the adamant one. You know, he's the one that's trained under Gamaliel. He knows the law, and he knows that all that's needed is faith alone in Christ. And so what happened is you had these Jews that were first being baptized by John the Baptist, and so they were becoming Jews. They were being, but then along came Jesus, the followers of Christ, and then those new followers were being baptized into Christ, and so they were Christians. They weren't called Christians yet, but they were Christians. So they were Jews that were being converted to Christians, and so these people that had been Jews all their life, when they were converted to Christians, some of them, there was this sect that began to go around and spread this idea that in addition to believing in Christ, that you also had to observe these Jewish customs, and so you had to be circumcised, you had to do all these rituals, and you still couldn't associate with non-Jews, you couldn't eat with them, and they were unclean, and just the whole thing. And so Paul was adamant about that. We're not doing that. That's not right. No, that's not the case. Okay, so we knew this, and then Peter knew this also. When Peter came to visit, he knew and believed that because Peter had already had that experience at Cornelius' house where God had shown him that he was not to make a division any longer. He was supposed to go to Cornelius' home and eat in his home, even though he wasn't a Jew. So, okay, Peter knew that, Paul knew that. Everything's fine. Peter's down there visiting. Okay, so all of a sudden, here comes the circumcision party. They're called, we call them the circumcision party because they're the people that go around and say, oh, even though you're Christians, you still have to follow Jewish laws. Okay, these are the sect. Okay, so here come the circumcision party in, and then Peter's sitting there eating with the Jews. They're all sitting there eating together because that's how it's done there in Antioch. And so they come in and start looking at Peter and passing judgment and looking down their nose. And all of a sudden, Peter jumps up and he runs over and washes his hands and gets a new plate. And he's all of a sudden over there being a devout Jew again. And so Paul comes in. Oh my goodness. Paul comes in and he sees what's happening. Oh, Paul lights it up, okay? Paul gets in Peter's face and tell him, hey, look, what are you doing? You are wrong. And not only what are you doing, you know better. And he tells Peter off. Tears Peter a new one. And Peter, the humble guy that he is, repents and says, you know what, brother, you're absolutely right. You know, he didn't jump up and fight him. You're absolutely right, brother. And so Paul um, sets the record straight. He says, Peter, now by doing this, you're leading other people astray because they're following you. You're a leader, and you're sitting up, And so, as a result of this big fight, there's a big meeting. The Jerusalem Council meets. It's a big old meeting, and Paul makes sure that it's clear. He gets the whole Jerusalem Council. This is the leaders, the Jewish leaders, to put in writing a law that says, okay, faith alone is enough. And so from that big fight, we get a very important occurrence occurs. But this only happens because of the humility. And so we can learn absolutely from Peter in this instant. Peter was humble enough to say, you're absolutely right. And this is my hope, is that I can do that when someone, you know, approaches me in love and correction, that I'm humble enough to say, oh, okay, you know what, I was wrong. So I always want to remain that. And this is the lesson that I can get from that. So you thought you were going to get some dirt. So that's the big fight between the. Oh, and this whole story can be. This is the story of Galatia. Actually, to get the story, you got to go a few places. I was going to say that you can go to. You know where you can go? You can go to my website, and you can go to the intro on the book of Galatians. And I have covered this in detail and told you where you can go to put the story together, because in order to get the story, you have to go to a few places. and put it together, a few of the books, and put the story together and synthesize the information. So if you go to the website and go to the intro for Galatians, you will be able to get the full story. Okay, there.